Everyone, in this video we are going to talk about the anatomy and the physiology of the human eye, which is the amazing organ that gives us the ability to see and interact with the world around us. Now, if someone asked you what type of organ is the eye, you probably say it is a sensory organ, and you'll be absolutely right. The eye allows us to detect light, color, shape, depth, and motion, and it sends all this information to the brain for interpretation. Now, let's start by looking at the anatomy of the eye, and then we'll dive into how it works, which is the physiology. The eye is a roughly spherical structure located in the orbit of the skull. It is protected by several layers of tissue, bones, and muscle. We can divide the anatomy of the eye into three main layers, from the outermost to the innermost. Firstly, we have the fibrous layer, which is the outermost layer of the eye. It is also the protective layer of the eye. This includes two major structures, the cornea and the sclera. The cornea is the clear, dome-shaped parts at the front of the eye. It is transparent and allows light to enter. The cornea also helps focus light onto the retina. Then, the sclera, often called the white of the eye. The sclera surrounds the rest of the eyeball. It provides protection and structure for the eye. The sclera is actually continuous with the cornea at the front. Then number two, we have the vascular layer, which is the middle layer of the eye. This layer is rich in blood vessel, and it contains the choroid, the ciliary body, and the iris. The choroid are a layer filled with blood vessels that supplies nutrients to the eye, especially the retina. Then the ciliary body is located behind the iris. It contains muscles that controls the shape of the lens. It also produces aqueous humor, that is the fluid in front of the eye. That is the anterior part of the eye. Then the iris, which is the colored part of the eye, it controls how much light enters the eye by adjusting the size of the pupil. We will talk about this later on. And then finally, we have the inner part of the eye, which is the sensory layer. This is where vision truly begins, and it has the retina. The retina is the innermost layer of the eye. It contains photoreceptor cells called rods and cones. And these rods and cones detect light and convert it into sensory signals that are sent to the brain. The rods are responsible for vision in low light, while the cones detect color and fine details, and they function best in bright light. Now, we also have something called the macula. The macula is the central part of the retina, and at its center is the fovea, which is the area for the sharpest vision. So you can be asked this in an exam, which area is the area of sharpest vision in the eye. You have to choose fovea as your answer. Now, at the back of the eye is the optic nerve, and this is the cable that sends the visual information to the brain. Now, where the optic nerve exits the eye, there is no receptor cells, and that area is called the blind spot of the eye. You can actually be asked this in an examination also. Now, let's talk about other important structures of the eye. Let's go over a few important structures like the lens, the aqueous humor, vitreous humor, eyelids, and the lacrimal glands. Now, for the lens are located behind the pupil, and the lens focuses light onto the retina by changing its shape. This process is called accommodation. Another examination question. Then we also have the aqueous humor. This is the clear fluid between the cornea and the lens, and it fills the anterior chambers of the eye. It also provides nutrients and maintains pressure. And we also have the vitreous humor, which is the jelly-like substance filling the large central cavity of the eye called the vitreous chamber, and this is found behind the lens. It helps to maintain the shape of the eyeball. Then we also have the eyelids and eyelashes. This helps to protect the eye from dust and injury. Then finally, we have the lacrimal cells. This produces tears, which keep the eye from moist and help to flush out foreign particles. Now, finally, let's go into how the eye works, which is the physiology of the eye. Now here is a very basic question. How do you see? So it all starts with when light enters the eye. The light passes through the cornea first, which then begins bending the light towards the back of the eye. Then it passes through the aqueous humor, which I've talked about before, then through the pupil. And remember, the size of the pupil is controlled by the iris, depending on how bright or dark the light is. Then the light hits the lens, which fine-tunes the focus, bending the light even more so that it lands directly on the retina. And then finally, the light travels through the vitreous humor and hits the retina, where the magic actually begins. Now, inside the retina are photoreceptor cells, the cones and the rods, and they actually absorb light. So the rods are more sensitive to dim light and they help us to see black and white. Then the cones are concentrated in the fovea, which is the area of sharpest vision, and they allow us to see colors and fine details. Now, once light is absorbed, these photoreceptors convert it into electrical signals, which I've talked about in the beginning of this video. Now, these signals are passed through a network of bipolar cells and ganglion cells, and then they exit the eye via the optic nerve. Now, here is where things get kind of interesting. The optic nerve from both eyes meets at a point called the optic chiasm, and this is where the nerve fibers cross to opposite sides of the brain. This crossing allows each half of the brain to receive input from both eyes, which is actually important for depth perception and 3D vision. Now from there, the signals travels into the visual cortex in the occipital lobe at the back of the brain, and that is where the brain processes everything: the color we see, the motion we see, the depth and the sharpness of every object we see, and then it creates a final image of what we see. So the fact that you're seeing this video is because the lights from this video have passed through all these processes and then it is converted into electrical signals, and it finds its way to the visual cortex in the occipital lobe, which is the back of your head, and it creates the image which you are seeing right now. Now, let's talk about eye movement and focus. The eye isn't a passive camera, it moves constantly, and those movements are controlled by 6 extraocular muscles. These muscles help the eye to look up, look down, look left and right, and then to look diagonally. Now, to focus on objects at different distance, the ciliary muscles adjust and shape the lens. So when you look at something near, the lens becomes thicker, and when you look at something far, the lens becomes thinner. Now, this process of changing the lens shape is called accommodation, and it allows you to shift focus between different objects at different distance. Now let's talk about protective functions of the eye. So we have the tears, which are produced by the lacrimal glands to help wash away dust or microbes or any foreign body that finds its way into the eyes. Then we also have blinking, which helps press the tears and clear the surface of the eye. Then we also have the conjunctiva, which is a thin membrane that lines the inside of the eyelids, and they cover the sclera and also helps to play a protective role. Now let's talk briefly about common eye conditions. So we have myopia, hypermyopia, astigmatism, cataract, glaucoma, and macular degeneration. So for myopia, which is nearsightedness, this is when the eyeball is too long and it causes light to focus in front of the retina. Then for hypermyopia, this is when the eyeball is too short, so light focuses behind the retina. And then for astigmatism, it is when the cornea or the lens has an irregular shape. Then for cataract is clouding of the lens. Then you also have glaucoma, which is increased pressure in the eye that can damage the optic nerve. And we also have macular degeneration. This is the damage to the macula affecting central vision. So in summary, the eyes collect and focuses light, while the retina detects the light and converts it into electrical signals, which are sent to the brain via the optic nerve. and then this optic nerve sends the signal to the visual cortex at the occipital lobe of the brain, and this is where the brain creates an image that we can see. So this is actually incredible, and it's surprisingly efficient how this all happens in quite milliseconds or so. So that is it on how the eye works, the anatomy and the physiology of the eye. Hopefully this video helped you to understand better on how the eye works and the functions of different structure, and also gave you a clear picture of how vision happens. So thanks for watching, and please don't forget to like and subscribe. Until next time.